confused.
Good evening. I'm Marissa Bowers. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole, and I'm calling to order tonight our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, September 26th. We have a lot of folks here joining us tonight who may not usually come to council meetings, so I did want to go over just a couple of things. It's a committee meeting. This is an opportunity for discussion and for council members and the administration to have a dialogue not just about items that might come before us for a vote, but also about educating us about things so that we can make better decisions in the future related to items that might come before us. There is no opportunity for public comment tonight, but we do have opportunities for public comment at our regular council meetings, which are on the first and third Mondays of the month at 7 o'clock. We have a new video comment feature so that if people are not able to physically be here and would like to submit a video comment to be displayed during hearing of visitors, there is a link to that on the City Council page of the Gahanna.gov website. You're also always welcome to email us at council@gahanna.gov if you would like to weigh in or speak on your opinion about a particular matter. Okay. As far as tonight's agenda goes, we have two items under discussions, and the first item under that discussion is our number 4 of our economic development training series. This was a series that was put together through cooperation by council and the administration. Director of Economic Development Nate Strum has been bringing in a series of presenters to speak on topics related to economic development, incentives, and land use throughout Gahanna. Tonight's presentation will be about a half an hour or so in length, with perhaps some questions and dialogue from council members at the conclusion of the presentation by our guest. After we move on from discussions, we have 3 items that are coming from council office that we'll be discussing. And then one of those, I think, will include a presentation regarding the rezoning of a parcel of land. That presentation will be informational, coming from the administration and the applicant to council for council to have an opportunity to ask questions. There will be a public hearing on that ordinance on October 17th. So in addition to public comment, there will be a more formal opportunity for opponents and proponents of that rezoning to weigh in at that time. We'll conclude the agenda tonight with 2 items from the Department of Administrative Services regarding staffing expenditures and the pay policy. All right, with that, I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Harris, who's of council at Bricker and Eckler, and Director Strum. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 4th installment of your favorite economic development series, focusing this evening on return on investment, or ROI. As Councilwoman Bowers noted, I'm joined with my great friend, Jeff Harris. Jeff and I had the distinct pleasure of working side by side when he was with Knox County and I was with Licking County way back in the day. But even before that, Jeff cut his teeth working for the Ohio Department of Development before heading over to Worthington, their Economic Development Office, heading off to Knox County, and then, as noted, he is of counsel with Bricker and Eckler. He's still a phenomenal person, even if he is a practicing attorney. He's also one of the lead writers and experts in economic development. As a member of the Ohio Economic Development Association, I can tell you that Bricker and Eckler is our chief counsel partners. And so Jeff and I regularly collaborate on things in the space around economic development policy, opportunity, and how do we make sure we continue to move the state forward in those spaces. So I'm thrilled this evening to introduce you to my great friend Jeff as he gives his presentation this evening on filling the financing gap, taxpayer funds merely enabling developer to buy her kid a BMW 7 Series. Thanks, Jeff. That's a great title for your series this evening. I thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Nate. And members of council, it's my pleasure to be here. As Nate said, I'm an attorney at Bricker and Eckler, but I come to you having done state and local economic development for about 20 years before I joined the law firm. All that time I was a lawyer, and I would take it as a huge compliment that, oh, I didn't know you were a lawyer. So thanks. I guess I was somewhat pleasant. And I know we have lawyers on the on council, so I didn't mean that. And other elected officials too. But there is a reason I have the title on that slide, and then I'm going to breeze through these. I'm told I have 4 hours to talk. Is that right? Yeah. All right. But I want to walk through, as part of Nate and the administration's walking council through economic development concepts, I want to walk you through the idea of return on investment and when, as often happens, communities overpay for development. So we're going to talk about that today. Hence my title here, that are you using taxpayer dollars in economic development to turn a private investor's return on investment for a real estate development deal from a 12% return to a 30% return, in theory, so that she can go out and buy her 16-year-old son a BMW 7 Series when he could have just done just fine with a Nissan Sentra, which was my first car. If the clicker works. There we go. Okay, thanks. This is taken from a larger presentation I've done before. I'm not going to go through in detail a lot of the slides, and towards the end I'll be able to knock a few of them off in the interest of time. What we want to talk about tonight is just how to fill the financing gap when we do see development deals come to the city of Gahanna. And you are asked to bless economic development financial incentives that Nate may be bringing to you, or the administration may be bringing to you, and how to ascertain what's the right amount to throw at a project from taxpayer funds. We'll talk about Economic Development 1.0, which is the old style, I'll call it, and then we'll talk about Economic Development 2.0, which is, I like to think, the more enlightened current era in which we operate. There are things that are well beyond Nate's control as your Economic Development Director. We'll talk about that. And then, if you haven't noticed already, I have a number of automobile metaphors throughout this thing, just trying to make it interesting. How to negotiate the extra floor mats to be thrown in when you buy your car. This is our real quick, we've got a resource document that I just updated this month. This is clocking in at over 120 pages, I think now. This is a guide to all of Ohio's economic development incentive programs, and there's a lot. But it also includes federal programs. I happen to be one of the team leads at Bricker on the use of ARPA funds, which has a tremendous amount of opportunity for the right uses. We have ARPA in there, among other things. That was our shameless plug. But I'll get right to it. The Ohio Constitution clearly understands and appreciates that local government, and by that I mean counties, townships, and of course city of Gahanna, can and will get involved in private transactions, specifically around creation or preserving jobs, improving the economic welfare of the state, or for those key areas: industry, commerce, distribution, and research. Those 4 words show up a lot in the revised code when we talk about doing economic development. But at its core, what Nate is doing and what I used to do for Knox County and the city of Worthington, and what everyone in our field does, is they intervene into otherwise private transactions. Intervene, and why? It's either to grow a tax base, or it's to address market imperfections. Market imperfections, from an economics course 101, idea is the notion that the private market fails to properly account for certain things in life, so that a business owner may make the purely rational decision that she's going to walk away from a building because it's obsolete, it's no longer worth the upkeep, and she leaves. She leaves the building behind because she doesn't need it anymore, and it's quite frankly easier to just walk away. That's a market imperfection because somebody's got to clean up the mess, and that somebody is, in this case, the city of Detroit. That's the old Packard facility that they abandoned back in the 50s. It's still there, unfortunately. A more recent example is what turned into the Columbus City Center Mall, so that you had a 1.3 million square foot mall. It was the cat's meow. I was here to have seen it in its heyday. I'm sure many, many of you were. And it had the Bendels at the top floor, big deal, right? It was really nice, except it was an enclosed mall built for suburban audiences in a downtown environment, and the market caught up to it. And so that it was demolished in 2009, well within the lifespan of the building materials. well within the space's design lifespan. And now it's turned into a beautiful, as we all know, you don't need the pictures, I'm sure you've been there, it's quite nice. That was a market imperfection where the property owners, the real estate investment trusts, all those different sophisticated investors said, we're walking out of here, we're getting out in terms of the building itself. The tenants themselves said, the Bendels I just referenced, they said it's not worth it to us, so they head out. Market decision, perfectly rational, leaves behind a big gaping 1.3 million square foot empty building, which was quite depressing to walk through. When I used to walk through it from the parking garage to my office, it was a pretty desolate place. So when we get involved, we being the royal we, right? It's Nate, it's attorneys like me, it's city councils, it's county commissioners. When we get involved in private transactions, we are trying to push tax-based growth. What are we talking about? We're either talking about payroll tax, or rather, how are we getting involved, I should say? It's through payroll tax credits, it's real property tax exemptions. There's a lot of acronyms on this screen. There's a ton of alphabet soup around this, and if you're a government junkie like me, you love it. If you're a member of the lay public, you probably hate it. My God, all these words and acronyms, there's too many, but each of them have a purpose. Diversion of tax revenue, and the most common and the most popular being TIF, or tax increment financing. And then special purpose entities that can create their own tax obligations or their own self-assessments. But when Nate and others in this field are getting involved in intervening into private transactions with your authorization, you have to ask, and he has to ask, what is it that I'm desired as my outcome? I'm going to try to grow sustainable paying, sustainable payroll, good jobs in my community, or I'm going to try to revitalize my downtown. But then questions come up. Is it worth getting involved in particular transactions? Or there are certain project types that just simply the city or Nate or others will not support, don't want to get involved. A classic example when I was in Knox County was we had a lead for a project coming in. They wanted a pet food manufacturer, wanted some space. Well, pet food manufacturing has a heavy component of meat rendering. In our community, I told them flat out, they're not going to go for it here. That's a project we're gonna pass on. There may be other undesirable project types that each community has to decide, do they want to get involved or not? And where do you want to encourage that growth? So it's a location aspect. We have to be careful when we get into economic development with public finance and the public trust and using taxpayer dollars, that there is an urge to simply do something. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine last week when I was Knox County's Economic Development Director. I tried to think, what can I show on a tally sheet that I actually accomplished? Not a whole lot, quite frankly. I had a lot of long days, a lot of grueling days, I'm sure Nate does too. And most of it is just trying to lay the groundwork or set the table for projects that are coming. Because almost every real estate development deal I've ever worked on is at least 3 years in length, from start to finish, and usually they're longer than that. And so there's an urge for economic developers to just do stuff, show up in the newspaper, make sure you do a lot of shovel turnings for groundbreakings, and make haste, right? But we have to be careful, because in order to just do something means sometimes the government may be getting overly involved in a project that they don't have to. Or thinking through offering carrots to come into one's community. We want to be careful that there are people like me who are quite mercenary, who know how to say just the right things to leverage the specific types of incentives or deals that could be made. And so we want to make sure that we think through, why are we being asked to contribute, and are we being shopped around just for the best deal for a private developer? All perfectly reasonable. All, hey, it's the American way to make a profit, but we just want to be careful when we have taxpayer dollars involved. So economic development is best viewed as just acknowledging there are rules to the game. And your own Mr. Strum is quite knowledgeable, and he's quite good at this. He just knows there are rules to this game, but we want to make sure we respect guardrails. And so a lot of these things are, the Goldilocks and the porridge, right? So what's the right temperature? It's to grow your community, including your school district. It's to build up infrastructure, and it's to really make sure that your community is well suited for the incoming deal and that you structure it just right. So the old way of doing it, and I started in economic development in the year 2000. I got out of grad school and I started the Department of Development, which, by the way, it's funny, I showed up here tonight. Gahanna is this origin story of so many economic development careers. William Murdoch and Sadiqa White, I've known them all, Anthony Jones, Nate Strom, that it's just a nice place to have grown up a lot of top talent in economic development. And so I've run across these folks over the last 22 years. And when I started the Department of Development in 2000, there was still the old style of thinking. And I remember dealing with some of the folks who'd been doing economic development since the 80s, and there was a notion that you just get out and you do whatever you can to create jobs and just do stuff. Strike as many deals as you can, award out as incentives as much as you can, put out there on the website that you'll take any deal, 100% abatement for 15 years, which is the state maximum, by the way, on certain products. And that's just what you do. And that's actually the ecosystem in which I learned economic development. But I started asking myself questions, and so did a number of others, including William Murdoch and Nate and others, right? Because, well, wait a second. When we're negotiating public dollars and public involvement through taxpayer funds, shouldn't we start every deal from your standpoint at zero? A developer comes and says, I need the city to give me a tax abatement, an income tax credit, some form of incentive. I need land for free. That's a common one in certain parts. In that Economic Development 1.0, the ecosystem in which I learned economic development, was you just did it. Because you want to get that newspaper headline, and you want to get that, it sounds cynical. I guess I'm cynical as I'm old. I am old, yeah, I'm a little jaded. But that notion that you just get as many deals on your tally sheet as you can, quantity over quality. But where we start to think about this is, well, what's the quality of the incoming deal? What are the quality of the jobs that are being shown to the city? And what is it that the developer actually needs to get the project to pencil out? And give no more than that. So oftentimes in economic development 1.0, the old style, it was damn the torpedoes, get those deals done, and abate real property taxes, and we'll send the schools a perfunctory notice that we have to under state law that, hey, we're going to do this, and you can send us a letter, but we're still going to go forward. And when I was in Worthington, there was a certain large city that had a significant amount of students in that school district, and that certain large city, which will remain nameless, would just send the perfunctory notices to the Worthington School Board saying, hey, we're doing a 100% deal for 15 years, or 75% deal for 10 years, rather. Live with it. And it was incredibly frustrating for that school district to receive those letters, and there wasn't a darn thing they could do about it. So through that experience, through other experiences I've seen, it was the notion that, hey, if economic development 1.0 was damn the torpedoes, offer up any project you could, as many incentives as you could, think through, let's start back at 0% of what we're willing to offer to a developer. Let's bring in the school district and have a collaborative conversation about whether or not this is a deal worth taking. Ask what the schools need as part of an economic development negotiation. That's anathema to some of the old style economic developers, which was, hey, they'll still get their cut of net new development. I actually found it to be much more beneficial to say, what else could you get, schools, that I could help you get, because we're a collaborative enterprise. I thought that was a useful way to take it. And the idea that so many times that, in my experience, and I'm sure Nate's as well, if you put yourselves out there, not you as a city, but just in the general sense, as we will incent heavily any project that comes at us. We will go to the state maximum level. It's like the signs that say state, beer at state minimum prices, right? If you put a sign out that says, state incentives or incentives at state maximum levels, I would argue you're probably overpaying for development. And that a Nissan Sentra could have gotten the deal done instead of giving that developer the BMW 7 Series because they made so much more on their return than maybe they were anticipating because so much of taxpayer dollars was thrown at the deal itself, right? So, at the end of this, I've got a slide or two that shows you what I mean by this, but having a frank conversation, which I know Nate's very good at, with developer XYZ, and they come in, they say, well, Nate, we need a real property tax abatement. We need 100% for 15 years, which is the state max. And Nate says, and I'm speaking for Nate here, but go with me on this. Well, let me see your pro forma. What's your investment Excel spread look like? And you see.
So far, he's right. Okay, continue.
And you walk through, and it's a collaborative conversation. It's a give and take, and you say, well, okay, I can see here on the sheet that you need about $300,000 to get this deal across the finish line. But I ran the numbers in my own office, I being Nate, and if I
That's
gave
the
you,
ROI tax sheet that everyone sees.
Yep, if I gave you a 15-year, 100% abatement, that actually nets out to, make up a number, $700,000. I'm overpaying for this development if you've told me, and we've agreed to a $300,000 gap in your financing. That's what I mean by that joke about if you don't need to give so much in taxpayer funds to get a deal done that then the developer's singing off to the car dealership saying, hey, I'm going to get a really nice car because I wasn't expecting that largesse from the city. So that we think through things less than the state maximum. It's a 6-year, 40% abatement may just cover that budget hole. And be careful of the magic words. Nate, I'm sure if you had a nickel for every time, well, we're thinking about Indiana, I don't know, it's either Gahanna or, we might move to southeastern Michigan.
I really don't. I love Louisville, Kentucky, but if I have that city used on me one more time.
Right. And it's because folks who have people like me working for them know that if you say out-of-state competition, you immediately draw down Jobs Ohio and state-level incentives beyond just what the city could do. And the folks know. They're the magic words in the deal. And so you have to deal with that. That's the rules of the game. And Nate knows how to play those rules. So then we ask ourselves, what is it going to take for the public investment? How much of the public investment will it take to get a deal to pencil out? And what is the developer's capital stack? If a developer has purely a little sliver of his own skin in the game, but then most of the rest is either leveraged debt or public investment, especially if it's heavy on public investment, you may want to run clear. Like, well, wait a second, your business model is mostly government investment. That's a problem. How are you going to make money? And how is it, is there enough here that I can show you in a net present value sense, using Nate's calculator that he uses here, what the current value of any incentive may be today, that we could walk through and understand how a city incentive sheet looks to a developer. And the capital stack that we think through is one that grants that are offered by public agencies or public entities like the city, and then it's the developer's own equity, and then it's a series of debt layers that are typically added on with then higher and lower risk profiles, with the grant money from cities and counties and the state being of the highest order to a developer because it's the lowest risk. Yeah, other people's money. That's right, other people's money. So when folks are coming to the city, I would argue, and I've argued this my entire career, or at least once I started to turn a little jaded eye to these economic development deals, is that we want to remember that somebody coming to you with a project is typically not just shopping homogeneous communities. They've come to Nate already because they've either liked the property that they've seen, they like the city, their wives are from here, their kids play, there's always some connecting point. Usually there's some connecting point to the home community and them asking or wanting to bring the project. So that means, in theory, You don't have to overpay for something that they already want to do in the first place, right? And remember, too, that anytime somebody tells Nate, well, I may pick up and move to Fort Wayne, Indiana, the amount of cost to relocate is phenomenally high. And I've called bluffs a few times in my career where I said, really? Are you really going to move to Fort Wayne? Well, no, not really. You know, my kids are still in high school. I'm not going anywhere. Great, good. So what's it going to take to get the deal to pencil out at an amount that is reasonable for the taxpayer, but also gets you what you need without me being the dumbest money in the deal? And sometimes it's okay to say no. Sometimes it's okay to say, that's a great project. I wish you well. I hope you move into that building, but we're not going to put any public dollars into it. I did that most recently in my local career with a call center, where they called and said, we want to put a new 100-seat call center in a community. Great. What will you give us? Nothing. Because call centers can pick up and move. There's hardly any fixed asset investment, and the turnover for employees is extremely high. And the wages aren't all that great. This is all pre-COVID, of course. But the idea was, I still want the deal. I'm just not going to put any taxpayer dollars into it, and it's okay. Now, that goes to the point I made that if I think back to my own career, what did I show for my last job? Well, not a whole lot, because I walked away from a call center, which the call center came anyway, by the way, because I knew it would. So you think through, like, you know, it's the old Alfred Hitchcock joke, right? About, or the who's the guy with the funny pipe? Sherlock Holmes. The case of the dog that doesn't bark, right? So
That's Alfred Hitchcock? I think that's Sir Conan Doyle.
yeah, right. Thank you, Nate. The idea that you get projects without necessarily getting a lot of credit for it, because you're just in the background saying, that's a good deal worth going for, or that's a deal not worth going for, and allowing the public dollars to filter out as they should. And ask the question, and he has to do this too, whenever he sees projects coming at him, is the juice worth the squeeze? Somebody may say, well, we really need investment from the city. And it may be that, well, that's my timer, I got 4 more minutes, right? It may be that, hey, and I've actually been on the receiving end of these phone calls. I really want a real estate tax abatement. Okay, what are you talking about? And you go through the litany of questions and you understand the project, and it turns out that actually they will not get a whole lot of benefit from that deal. And so I will say to them, well, you're going to pay more in an attorney to read your contract I'm going to send you than you'll get in your first year of benefit. You then have to pay me $500 a year to be in the program, which then continues to take down your modest benefit. And at some point, it just may not be worth doing the deal to you, property owner or developer. And these are the kind of questions and answers and conversations that Nate has every day, and I've had them too, is understanding what is it going to take to get the project done, and sometimes it's not worth it. So things that are outside Nate's control, things that were outside my control. There may be folks who are ideologically opposed to financial incentives, so free market should carry the full weight.
Not council.
Yeah. However, the local school board and how they function or not. The classic township versus municipality versus county tension point. If I had a nickel for every time I had a township, or rather a city, call me and say, well, I don't get along with our township. Well, okay, that's the 3rd call I've had today. It's okay. It happens everywhere in Ohio. Not so much here, but certainly out in the rural areas. Private ownership of what otherwise would be ideal properties to develop. Those are things that, Nate, you've probably had your eye on some key properties, and you can't do anything about it. If Farmer Brown doesn't want to sell it to you, you're not going to get it. Yep. And then whatever comes from the state in terms of whether or not they support a project. So these are some of the programs that Nate has available to you through TIF and Community Reinvestment Area and enterprise zones. But what I want to go through here real quick, and you'll have this slide deck, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have. Hell, I'll even come back. So this is an example of some of the number crunching that we do, that Nate does, to understand what's the bottom line that helps a deal get done. Just a quick example, but this is one that I like to tout, And this is a grocery store that came to Worthington a few years ago. And when they came in, they said, look, we need $110,000 to pay for a relocation of a storm sewer beneath that grocery store. $110,000. And we said, great, okay, show us your pro forma. And we understood it. And we had a frank conversation with the developer. Yep, 110 grand, that's what we need for the sewer relocation. And so we designed a TIF to actually get the $110,000 paid to the developer and not a penny more. And the remaining balance, so if we saw $277,000 in net present value to that TIF, the remaining $167,000 went into the city for other related infrastructure. After this deal closed, the developer called and said, well, wait, can I get more of that beyond that $110,000? And I said, no. You asked for $110,000, and you showed us your estimate from the vendor. That's how much it would cost to relocate that sewer line. You get 110, that's what we wrote the agreement for, we're done. Because they didn't understand that the way that these things flow is you actually could see even beyond the $110,000 in revenue to that TIF fund. And so we said that was the deal that was struck. We don't want to overpay for the development. We'll take the other $167,000 for what the city needed for its own infrastructure, and the deal was done. So with that, my phone or my watch went off twice, which tells me to stop talking, and I am happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And you guys think I'm a card. This is where I learned my stuff from.
That's great.
Thank you so much. This is really fantastic. Questions from council?
Well, I want more.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mr. Weaver. Yeah.
You go ahead, Madam Chair.
No, I was just going to echo Ms. Angelou's comments that I could honestly say I'm nerding out with you, and that's a good thing because I'm really enjoying this presentation and the way you're delivering it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilman Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation and for being here. I really do appreciate it. This whole economic development series has been fantastic from one presentation to the next. So thank you very much. I feel you really hit the nail on the head. You know, we do expect developers to have a little skin in the game. And at the same time, we need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I think my colleagues and I all would agree with me that, you know, these projects should result in a symbiotic benefit to both the property owner, the developer, as well as the betterment of the community. And our Director Strum does a really fantastic job of laying that out for us. Those ROI spreadsheets are really great, and so thank you, Director, for that. I did have one question. Could you explain a bit further about when Jobs Ohio gets involved and what sort of additional incentives that they're able to offer from the state level as compared to at the municipal level?
Sure. Yeah. So, and Nate, chime in here. Sure. Yep. So you'll see Jobs Ohio get involved on projects that are attraction-based, so net new projects coming into the state of Ohio, including the city. If they are identifying the city as a potential location, and that involve interstate competition. Mm-hmm. So it is a project that a site selector is a vendor who's hired by a company to say, go out and find me a site. I need 500 acres with rail service and you know, whatever the bells and whistles of the land would be. And that site selector, they're typically, well, they're agnostic for sure. They could care less where the project lands. It could be anywhere from Pennsylvania to Iowa and any point in between. And they will send out feelers, and they'll send out notes to all the states in between Pennsylvania and Iowa and say, we need 500 acres with rail service, and give us what you've got. And so then that bait, right, if you will, gets picked up by all those states. Here would be Jobs Ohio. And Jobs Ohio will then filter it down to its regional network, which for our region is the One Columbus network, which you're all part of. And so then Nate will receive an email from One Columbus saying, we have a lead. They want 500 acres. They want rail service. Do you have anything? Of course, in this case, maybe not. That may be a big
Yeah, I'm
step.
going to say no.
Yeah. But the Jobs Ohio folks get involved because it's an interstate competition. It's a project from elsewhere that's not in Ohio that is thinking about not only Ohio but other states. Jobs Ohio would say, we want to win that project. We will then get involved with our own bevy of incentives that they have. They have a lot of grant programs. They have a lot of low interest, no interest loans. They do the job creation tax credit negotiations that the state offers.
I was going to jump in. So their biggest carrot in the conversation is their JCTC, the Job Creation Tax Credit, which is a credit against the commercial activity tax or CAT tax that the state has. It's a fully refundable tax credit. So if the generation of the CAT in an annual year is less than the value of the JCTC, then those dollars are actually directly refunded to the company above and beyond. Other major grant programs that they have are in the data center area. So they do a sales tax exemption on the operations and needs towards its data centers. R&D has a tax credit incentivization, and some of the larger stuff that you've seen even more recently with some of the larger projects that won't go be named here, but maybe valued in the 10 to 20 billion range, is a lot of infrastructure improvements. So there's a lot of infrastructure funds available either directly through Jobs Ohio or through their related agency at Ohio Department of Development, ODOT, and other related entities. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harris, thank you for your presence today and for the presentations. Very engaging. A lot of questions, but I'll just, for the sake of time here, stick with one. The prior back and forth with Councilman Reaver was dealing with interstate competition, and I think you had mentioned that was one of the magic words out there. Do you have any guidance, thoughts, best practices regarding intrastate and perhaps even intra-regional? I know Gahanna is not the only community that's effectively fallen victim to what we'll call poaching by other communities. You know, it happens. So just curious if you have any thoughts or guidance on kind of how to deal with that. And would an agreement between regional communities even be something feasible or appropriate?
I would love to handle that one, actually, because there is a handshake within the Mid-Ohio Development Exchange, which is a sister agency to One Columbus, Matt McAllister references previously. There is a handshake arrangement that there is no poaching, that in instances of growth and opportunity within organic needs, if a company were to knock on my door today, and I'll use the example, I actually shared this with Councilman Padova and Councilman Weaver earlier. If a community comes to my office or a company comes to my office and says, hey, I'm over in Delaware and I'm looking to grow in Gahanna, my first conversation isn't actually to that company. My first conversation is to the city of Delaware. And I say, hey, listen, you need to go talk to that company, make sure they can fit the needs, because they're looking over here. And I want to talk to them, but I want to do so when I absolutely know that they're not going there, because the last thing I want is my counterpart in Delaware having the same conversation with the company from Gahanna. There is a mutual respect in that space. And we do have that arrangement. And quite frankly, because we don't want to have all the regional economic developers going around to everyone else's communities, drumming up and ginning up their own leads based upon businesses that are upset at their local communities. It's just not, it's not worth it, quite frankly, Councilman. So we do have that arrangement.
What Nate just described is that economic development 1.0. It really was a thing 30 years ago.
Was.
You get your contact list of the next town over and you start cold calling on companies saying, hey, I've got land over in my community. That actually was a thing. And I'd run into some of the old timers like, that's what you did. And you say, oh my God, that's so counterproductive, because probably half the workers are living in your community already. And what are you doing? So anyway, but my other thought on that, council member, is if you've got a company that is shopping around for incentives, I would typically take, I would almost want to say, well, wait a second, I want to get to know you. What are you about? Who are you? Why are you looking at me? What other communities you're looking at? And try to understand, are they just doing it on literally $1 and cent incentive? They just want to get the juiciest deal that they can around I-270 Outer Belt? Or is there some compelling reason they want to be in your community? And that happens sometimes. Even after the phone call is made to Delaware, it may be that Delaware says, yeah, they really just want to be in Gahanna. And that handshake that Nate's part of, it really does work. Like, okay, great, let's talk to them. The ones that we want to be careful of are the ones that literally just call every community along the I-270 Outer Belt and say, what will you give me? And now there are some
And they do it again every 10 to 15 years whenever the abatement runs out.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, is that if they're going to do that to you, or if they're going to do that to the home community now, you can be rest assured when their lease is up or their abatement burns off, they'll be doing the same thing, and they'll be calling the town just south of you, the just north of you. So that's the kind of thing you just want to be careful, like who are you making friends with, because you may be in that tough spot quite soon once that incentive goes away.
Thank you. I have another couple of questions for you. So I thank you again, and it's really good to hear you talk a little bit about the difference between interest-based negotiation versus positional negotiation, and I think that that's really great to hear that that's really going on kind of in your day-to-day work. So I appreciate that and how important it is in moving these deals forward. I was really interested in some of the slides that were on the first presentation that kind of got sent to us, the Goldilocks porridge slides,
Right.
and a little bit more about the ROI kind of approaches and analyses. Could you give us kind of a rundown and
Share the OEDA slides too.
just a little bit kind of on the difference, I guess, between the different approaches on ROI, and you provided us also with this great article from Stanford, and maybe for Nate or for Jeff. You guys are like a meeting of minds, I can tell, so whoever is best suited.
No, you go for your slide first. That first.
So, and I want to make sure that I direct my comment to your question. So on return on investment, just see, well,
That's fine. I'm pulling them up. See, Council, I'm actually really excited that the councilman actually did the pre-reading. I'm always worried that when I send these things, no one actually reads them. So we're cheating now.
Well, I really liked that you had this kind of the concepts in here about really thinking through what are the benefits of an abatement, and are they really going to address the need of the business? And also that you said, don't rely on the private developer's financial pro forma, be comfortable with kind of digging into their spreadsheets.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Bowers. The deer in the headlights is now washed away. I'm here. Okay. So what I found is that he or she who owns the data often owns the negotiation when it comes to these incentives. And so it's very important, at least from my standpoint, that Nate does his ROI calculator, or I would run that spread that I had. I know you couldn't see it, was too small, but to understand if somebody is going to ask for an incentive, run the numbers first, and then tell them, because a lot of times I'd get folks who'd say, well, I want an incentive. Do you understand what it means? Well, no, not really. Do you even know what your commercial real estate tax millage load is? No. And so you just take it apart, right, and unpack it. So that the return on investment conversation would be, well, and I used it as a brief example earlier in my comments, that you see the pro forma from the developer, they needed $300,000 to get a project done, but if you own the data for how the incentive works, as Nate does, and as I tried to do as well, you would know that if you offered a 15-year abatement for 100%, you knew that that would actually well beyond overpay the $300,000 needed for the project. So it came down to having a spreadsheet for each and every project, or program rather, that we ran, so we would know what the value of it would be truly to a developer on an estimated basis. So you'd say, well, I don't know that that project is worth that, or you need this, and I can get you what you need with half of the incentive amount that you're asking me for.
Well, and circling back to the councilman's comment around the Stanford analysis, and what we actually do opportunity-wise in that ROI calculation, and what they're looking for is trying to figure out where that balance is at the end of the day. It's figuring out, to Mr. Harris's comment around what makes the most sense for the private development community versus the public side of it. What the council oftentimes sees from me is that final ROI calculator that I pulled together through, and again, we've had this conversation in these chambers actually regularly. That ROI calculator is an evolving tool. It's something that was developed through Ohio University in their economic development program with Jason Jolly, but it's something that we continue to evolve in and to find that balance. To me, there's no silver bullet, there's no easy button on this, because at the end of the day, it's how we envision the development happening, and where we find the most value on the public side is where the leverage is going to happen. If we really want to prioritize manufacturing jobs and food production manufacturing jobs, and that's going to have a different weight to it than, say, if we were going to evaluate what medical jobs look like or what general office jobs look like. Does that make sense? And so to me, that's how you kind of always continuing to tip those scales and prioritize ROI, because ROI in a deal is very different depending on how you're prioritizing and how you're putting your own thumb on the scale from a public sector standpoint. And by the way, one thing that Jeff does touch on in that original slide deck is, and he also noted it in tonight's slide presentation, is, we strictly talk about dollars and cents. Time can be just as critical of a component and value in these deals than anything else. If you can save time in the rezoning process, which you may hear a little bit about tonight, or on infrastructure development programming, or workforce alignment, or school relationship building and internship, that brings just as much value, if not more at times, to a project than the dollars and cents of an abatement or an income tax credit of some sort.
Yeah, that really brings it back to that interest-based negotiation versus positional. Yeah, thank you. Any other discussions or comments from council? Any other closing comments from Director Strum or Mr. Harris?
Just a reminder, we have one more session. It's called Pulling It All Together. So we'll see how the last 4 presentations have gone. The next session will be the 10th of October, I believe, for that committee of the whole. And you'll see a summarization of all these presentations I'll pull together. I'll also walk through a little bit more about how do we move forward as a department and as a city in having these resources and having these frank conversations, and where I think we can make some changes, we can make some adjustments, and how we can keep driving opportunities here. Because as a landlocked community, we have to be very strategic. To Jeff's comment and my philosophy and why the mayor brought me in, there's really 2 philosophies in economic development. And it's one of either being exceptionally strategic and being hyper-targeted, or I want every deal every time. If it flies, it dies kind of mentality. And we don't have the luxury to be that kind of person and that kind of a city. So we want to be super strategic about how we approach these opportunities and make sure that we are being surgical as possible with where we want to place some of these opportunities and grow our economy. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. All right, item number 2 under discussions tonight, update from the IT department on the website contract. Mr. Schultz, good evening.
Just a quick informational piece based on some work that we've been doing in the IT department and with the administration as it relates to the website. Anybody who ventures to our website for any real piece of information will say, unless you know exactly where it is you're going, we find the website to be an extremely challenging tool for not just us who are familiar with it, but citizens who may be coming to look up a particular piece of information for a particular purpose. So back in June, we released an RFP that went out and solicited different proposals from a variety of different contractors. And we received 5 different proposals. We did receive inquiry from about 10 or 12 different vendors who did inquire on the project itself. But we received proposals anywhere from $172,000 all the way down to $13,000 in order to redesign and redevelop our website. From that particular process, we selected 2 vendors. We shortlisted 2 vendors to come in and interview on this particular project. It was a very competitive process that we went through. I've been doing RFPs for quite some time now, and I would say that I've never been part of a project or a process that was as competitive as this one, where we had basically 2 shortlisted vendors that were really a mix or a match for one another for the services that they would provide. So basically, at that particular point, it was excuse me, cost really became the factor as to which vendor we would select. So we did select Civic Plus. Civic Plus, I can almost guarantee you, if you've been to many municipal websites, whether it's here in the state of Ohio or throughout the country for that matter, you've probably happened upon a Civic Plus website. My first experience with Civic Plus was way back in Ontario County, the county that I used to work for in upstate New York, and that was 12 plus years ago. Civic Plus has over 12,000 municipal customers, and they are really a web-based technology company at this particular point versus the type of website company that they were just a short 10 or 12 years ago. They offer other products of which we already are signed on to. MuniCode being one of those products, Next Request being another product that they just recently acquired. That's the records management tool that we are currently using. And we also utilize Archive Social, which is the archiving tool that we utilize throughout the city here for records retention purposes on our social media accounts. So we just recently signed the contract, I believe, last week. And where we'll go from there is we'll basically go into stakeholder engagement. We'll run this project through a process of basically initiate the project, analyze the existing website. The existing website has over 500 pages on it, whether those are HTML pages or PDF pages, so online forms and those types of things. Most of that information is outdated. Most of that information is very narrative in nature and not real customary towards providing information that folks need at this particular point in time. They will do a complete redesign, a rebuild, and reorganization of the website. And we are anticipating that the project take anywhere from 5 to 7 months for a relaunch of the project. So basically just some highlights, if you would. There's supposed to be some animation there on the right-hand side. I'm not quite sure why it's not there. But basically they would do a complete reorganization and redesign of the entire Gahanna.gov website as we know it today. The website will become fully responsive. So if you're looking at it on a mobile device, on an iPad, on a desktop PC, it'll be appropriate for the device in which you are looking up information on. We have elected to upgrade the package, if you would, to include these premium headers, these premium header packages. And basically what that entails is just think of a similarly branded site, but a different organizational structure for somebody like Parks and Rec or somebody like Economic Development, so that their information is organized in a more appropriate manner and easier to find when you're there looking for an economic development incentive or a Parks and Recreation program, as opposed to going to our main site and then having to thumb through the annals of information that are there in order to find a particular piece of information. Civic Plus is directly integrated with social media. So if Mr. Perlman puts up a press release for X, he can automatically integrate that into Facebook, Instagram, and those types of things. And we no longer need to manage those posts individually, but we can manage those through the content management system that Civic Plus offers us. It'll be a full development of an online form center. So no more filling out and printing of PDFs to probably put in an envelope or drop off manually here to City Hall. Hit submit and it magically in year 2022 show up in somebody's email inbox for processing and such. So it also does at the same time come with a complete payment gateway integration, so folks will be able to pay for a variety of different things right online as well. And then probably the most important part, and again, both companies offered the same exact thing, but a full website redesign in about a 4-year time period. And why that's important is that as we change, as we adapt, as just the information that we need to provide to residents changes, so does the way in which that information should be upgraded and then ultimately displayed to folks. The overall project cost on this particular project is $49,730. That is a one-time implementation fee with about $11,000 in annual maintenance costs. Currently, just as a point of reference, we pay $10,200 currently for our annual maintenance on our existing website. What it also does is it gives us the ability to lessen the technology stack that we're dealing with. And we actually can eliminate one or two, we're still in the assessment of the second piece, but one or two different pieces of technology we use right now in order to deliver, namely our newsletter. So that whole package goes away, which is about a $10,000 cost savings over what it is that we do currently today. So yes, there is a $49,700 implementation fee. That includes the, everything that's listed on this slide, including the four-year revision. But then we would ultimately see about a $10,000 reduction in the overall operation of the website from year to year. So with that, I can take any questions that you guys might have.
Just clarification, the $10,000 cost on the platform for the newsletter, is that an annual fee, or is that over the 4-year period that you're projecting?
No, that's an annual $10,000.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion, questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you.
Would we expect this to come forward on the regular budget then, or?
So this is
as a separate-
informational only at this particular point because of the new procurement policy that was implemented. This does not require council action in order for the mayor to sign the contract. So this contract has already been signed as of last week and will begin implementation. I'm sure that there'll be some informational parts and pieces throughout the year as we're doing implementation to present before you guys and the public as we get into design and reorganization and those things.
I believe it was included in the 2022 budget.
But yes, it is, I'm sorry, yes, it is included in the 2022 budget. Yep.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for the update. All right, moving on to Section C of the agenda, items from council office. The first item is Resolution 31-2022, a resolution recognizing October 2022 as Arts and Humanities Month for the city of Gahanna. I believe Councilman Weaver took the lead on drafting this. Mr. Weaver, would you like to share some
Sure.
points on this with us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. First, thanks to Clerk Van Meter for his assistance with this as well. By its title, this resolution serves to recognize October as Arts and Humanities Month in the city. This is a national effort that we are bringing to the city, and as part of the resolution, it encourages community members to get out and take advantage of the many opportunities provided in the city. For example, just yesterday, the Gahanna Area Arts Council, in partnership with Visit Gahanna and the Parks and Recreation Department, as well as many community sponsors, helped bring out the Columbus Symphony to the beautiful Sun Point Park for a wonderful concert. Great opportunity, and appreciate any feedback my colleagues might have.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any discussion on this point? I know this is an area of special interest for Councilwoman Angelou as well.
And if I may, I would ask for a regular agenda on this in case there are guests.
All right, very good. Great, we'll have it on regular agenda for October the 3rd then.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is ordinance 56-2022, an ordinance to amend the official zoning map of the city of Gahanna adopted by ordinance 198-96 on November 19, 1996, and subsequently amended, changing the zoning district of 13.96 acre parcel located at 5503 Morse Road, parcel ID 025-011219 from estate residential -1 ER1 to multifamily residential district MFRD, Project Morse Road 14, Scott Harper applicant. And I believe, Director Blackford, will you be introducing this item?
Eventually.
Okay,
We're having technology issues.
yes.
We could sing. I could lead something.
There you go.
Stop.
no need to sing. I think Kevin's getting the PowerPoint up there. I'm waiting for the magic to happen. You all look wonderful tonight, by the way.
I noticed your glasses when you're sitting over there. Are those a new accessory?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Thank you.
You looked very distinguished.
You're a nappy dresser, Michael.
Just following Kevin's lead, the purple. Boy, this is rough without my PowerPoint.
Can you tell jokes like Nate?
All right. Saved by the PowerPoint. All right, the long-awaited PowerPoint for tonight. We have a rezoning request that Planning Commission looked at and recommended approval of a few weeks ago. On the screen right now is a location and zoning map. So what we're looking at here on the north side is Morse Road. Here to the west, Hamilton Road. Over to the east, we have 62. This is the roundabout, some landmarks. You have the barn, High Bank. You have two different assisted living facilities immediately to the east and west. And to the south, you have a variety of residential multifamily projects. This property is zoned ER1 momentarily here. I'll explain what exactly ER1 is. The adjacent properties, again, suburban office to the east and west, and multifamily residential district. MFRD is there in red, and that's what the applicant is requesting. So tonight before you is rezoning, and on some levels it's very simple. What they're requesting is to rezone just under 14 acres from estate residential to MFRD. To give you some background to just what does ER1 mean, what does MFRD. ER1 is estate residential. That is a 5-acre lot zoning. Single family is allowed by right, but there's a lot of other uses that are also allowed. This is the complete list. Parks, agricultural uses, so that is crops, that's also farm animals, farmers markets, agricultural storage and processing, stables, vets and kennels, bed and breakfast. So that's what the current zoning allows for. That's estate residential 1. The proposed zoning is MFRD. That stands for multifamily residential district. There's one use allowed by right, and that's multifamily. Density is up to 18 units to an acre. That requires a conditional use. There is one other use that's allowed by conditional use, and that would be assisted living facilities. The two properties to the east and west have a similar use as what could be allowed here. Again, they're rezoning just under 14 acres. It's 251 units is what they're proposing. That comes to 18 units, just under 18 units to an acre. That's the maximum allowed by code. But again, that's not actually what we're here tonight approving. You're not approving or denying density unit total. It's the zoning classification of MFRD. That means if this is approved, there's additional applications required. I'll touch on that momentarily. So density, site layout, things of that really comes after the rezoning if it is successful. The code does require land dedication or fees in lieu as part of the multifamily rezoning process. The applicant, various members of city staff, the Parks and Rec Board, we provide feedback, and it was the desire of the city, which again was myself, the Director of Parks, and the Parks and Rec Board, and the applicant to do fees in lieu as opposed to on-site land dedication. There's an appraisal required. That's based off of, we do an analysis of that appraisal. It's based off of the projected population of the project and the size of the project. And in this case, if the rezoning is approved and they develop the property, the city would be getting $175,000.01 as part of that fees in lieu. On your screen right now is the conceptual site plan. This is part of their application package. You all have this. This is conceptual. I think the applicant, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit. This is probably what they'll be submitting if it's approved, but again, it's just conceptual at this point. few elements to point out, and I know on the screens it really doesn't show, but the setbacks here, this is what the code requires. This is a 25-foot setback. That is the setback for the front, side, and rear property. What doesn't show on here is the various types of landscaping they have to provide in that area. The code does require buffering in addition to the setbacks. Again, if this is approved, then those future applications would determine, what type of buffering would be appropriate in that area. The site layout here, again, with the number of buildings, it says on there that it's going to be 2 and 1 bedroom units. Again, that's what they're planning on doing, but that's not what's really part of the rezoning, but that's just for informational purposes at this point in time. When we evaluate a rezoning request, there's really 2 main sections or documents that we look at. It's the zoning code, which I'll cover in a moment, and also our land use plan. The land use plan designates this area as mixed use, and what exactly does that mean? Well, some land use plans might say there needs to be a vertical mix of uses and buildings, or projects of a certain size might have to have a horizontal mix of uses. When we talk about mixed use here in Gahanna, it's really looking at all the various mixed-use properties, and we want to see a variety of uses. It's not that every project has to have a mix of uses in and of itself. And residential is an encouraged use in mixed use. The land use plan says that in theory, doesn't mean everywhere, but just in theory, 70-foot building height and up to 30 units per acre may be appropriate in these mixed-use areas. Then we look at some of the other provisions within the land use plan. Over 90% of our housing stock was built prior to the year 2000. The land use plan talks in great detail about the need for additional housing opportunities and how the market preferences have shifted away from traditional single-family lots into more different housing opportunities. One thing that's very important is that the land use plan is not law. It's a guide. It's meant to guide decisions. It does not mandate particular decisions. The zoning code has 6 different criteria. There's 6 different criterion here to consider when evaluating a rezoning. This applies to staff, planning commission, and to city council. Those are, is it consistent with the goals of the land use plan? Is it physically compatible? Is development physically compatible on the property with those allowed uses? Are there sites available where it's already zoned for the proposed use? And I can tell you I had a conversation today, I had a conversation Thursday of last week, and I have a conversation Wednesday about availability of land, the lack thereof for this particular use. And I can tell you that as far as the last bullet there, apparent demand for uses, this trumps all other phone calls that I get. It's for multifamily. It's certainly the predominant use that people are interested in. Compatibility of all potential uses allowed in the proposed zoning. We just talked about that briefly. Again, multifamily is basically the only use allowed. Capacity of infrastructure. There is a preliminary review done at this stage. This is rezoning. It's conceptual. We don't know exactly what the uses are on that. So if this is approved, the infrastructure will be further refined through the engineering plan review process, but that preliminary review did not indicate any major deficiencies. Again, here's a little bit of a zoomed-in zoning map with the subject property there in the top with the red star. Again, when we talk about availability of sites, consistency, compatibility, the predominant zoning in this area, which is at times called the North Triangle, it is multifamily. On your screen right now, there's over 100 acres in red. That is the MFRD zoning category. So again, from staff's point of view, this is the predominant zoning. There is only one piece of property on this map that's zoned Estate Residential 1, and that is the subject property. And again, that's a large lot, single family, and agricultural zoning. So as far as staff's concerned, that zoning is not appropriate, the existing zoning. MFRD is more compatible and consistent with the uses out there. That's one of the reasons why staff recommends approval. It's consistent with the recommendations of the land use plan. Again, the land use plan designates this property mixed-use district. Residential is one of the recommended and preferred uses. We have a land use plan that recognizes the need for additional housing opportunities. I know we've had, I think it was last year maybe, we had some folks from Orpsey come in and do some presentations, and they talked about job creation being linked to the creation of housing, and they really recommend a 1-for-1. If your community's going to create one job, it really needs to create one residential unit. We don't have a lot of available land for residential. Maximizing the density is important. Planning Commission did recommend approval of this request, 6-1. There were other applications that they considered. There was conditional use and variances that would be necessary to kind of allow that configuration that we saw in that conceptual site plan. Those applications were approved. Those go into effect only if the rezoning is approved. If the rezoning is approved, there are next steps. There are a variety of applications that require a public hearing for the Planning Commission. Those are a final development plan and a design review application. Those applications cover details such as finalizing what the setbacks are, what the parking counts are, landscaping, building materials, building colors, those types of things are refined through those additional applications if the rezoning is approved. There's also 2 major administrative applications required. That's your building permits, structurally, they're looking at those elements, and then engineering plans, which is, again, more of the drainage and infrastructure to support the request. So there are several additional steps if the rezoning is successful. With that, I will conclude my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. I know the applicant's team is here, and I'm sure they want to talk to you about their project. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Blackford. I have one quick question before we get more substantive questions. The parcels to the east and the west of this project that I think they were in a light green, what zoning are those right now?
Those are suburban office.
Okay.
And the 2 projects, one is Sage Park, that is the one to the west. Then there's a larger assisted living facility, which I think is Story Point is what they're calling themselves now. But that is suburban office. Those projects were developed when our zoning code allowed for those facilities in suburban office. Subsequent to those, it was changed to allow those in multifamily residential only.
Great, thank you. Other questions or discussion from council? Mr. Weaver?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. So, just so we're clear, before council at present is just the proposed rezoning change.
Correct.
And in the future, proponents, opponents would have an opportunity to be heard on the final development plan at Planning Commission?
Correct. So, yes, there is public input for the final development plan. There is advertising that goes out to adjacent property owners and that, so there would be an opportunity for input then. Yes, sir.
So after this, what else is to come before council, if anything?
This most likely would only be the only item.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Blackford, for the presentation and for the comments, specifically reference to the land use plan. I don't have to tell you, but I served on the steering committee along with my colleague to my left, Chairwoman Bowers, and I think the future land use plan is really our principal kind of guiding document when it comes to decisions such as these. And so for that reason, I spent some time revisiting it. I believe it was 2019 when it was formalized, so not that old. But I do understand that things change. So I just want to, I guess, draw attention to the public engagement section within the future land use plan, specifically that under Focus Area 1, the North Gateway, of which this project would be domiciled within. And I'll just quote here. It says, "The North Gateway, West Gateway, and downtown focus areas received 0 total votes for additional low-density residential, despite this character type currently representing 40%, 51%, and 31% of those area land uses respectively. The North Gateway area had a smaller number of desired land uses represented, with the highest voted being community commercial." This document goes on to say, "This is an acceptable land use designation as Morse Road makes up a large portion of this focus area and would be the correct setting for community commercial development." And there's a little graphic on there or exhibit that kind of shows some of the vote totals. Back of the napkin math suggests that's somewhere around 3-1 if you lumped in mixed use, assuming it was vertical mixed use that had some commercial components. So about a 3-1 ratio from the public engagement portion that would consist of some form of commercial vis-a-vis residential. So I hope that makes sense. I guess my question is, has anything materially changed within the publication of this document that we should be taking into consideration, given that we have a request for MFRD, when it seems the overwhelming will of the residents is for something of a commercial variety for this particular area?
Well, I would say that a lot's changed since 2019. I think this analysis was probably more of 2018 adopted in 2019. And I would say what that is, when, from a planning standpoint, community commercial is largely retail types of service, types of uses. And the demand for those types of uses, quite frankly, has plummeted over the last few years. I don't think I've received more than 2 or 3 phone calls, maybe a month at the most, if I'm being generous, for those types of uses. So the demand for those types of uses really isn't there. And what traditionally we would see in a community commercial types of uses, which would be maybe more of a, what we see, and you can see like on this map, you see the other type of, light brown, whatever that is, beige, there is community commercial. So in the Stone Ridge area, the Giant Eagle, Valvoline, things of that nature. It's very minimal, and when it is, it's really sort of those standalone, quite honestly, standalone auto kind of uses are what we're seeing demand for in those community commercial. And whether that's because of COVID or not, but just the way things have been trending over the last couple of decades, the demand or the inquiries that I receive for retail is basically non-existent.
Sure. Can I have a follow-up to that, Madam Chair? Just from my own, since I don't live and breathe this stuff on a daily basis, maybe you can help to educate me a little bit. There was also some listings for neighborhood commercial, professional office, those types of things, and anything in there like dentist office, surgery centers, would those be permitted uses or acceptable, or would they fit that definition or criteria?
Yes, they would. They would really fit into, if we're talking community commercial, professional services, neighborhood commercial. Those are typical uses that we would see in those zonings, yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
I guess one question, you say what's changed since then. One thing that's changed is the way we choose our income tax. I mean, the way that we increased our income tax, but we did away with the piggyback tax, which everybody paid a portion of in Gahanna. So now only the people who work in Gahanna are the people that pay our income tax. So if this was office or professional buildings, we would see the gain of that. Whereas residential, maybe not, any of those people, but we may not see any really income tax from that development, or a very small part. That's kind of an iffy thing, whereas if they were, a business office, surgical center, doctor's office, we would be receiving income tax on that.
That would be true, but I would say that, property tax, this area is in a tax increment finance district. So we would be capturing additional property tax in this area from this development.
Okay. The other thing, just as a point, is this is kind of remote from a lot of our parklands. And so I think that, I kind of don't, I wish you were having some parkland or open space dedication in this area, and for sure adequate storm detention, because, you're going to have 250 units, and there's not a parkland, where you walk your dog.
So there is on-site recreation amenities proposed. So
like open space parkland?
Well, the parkland dedication is public park.
Right.
So, but there is recreation amenities proposed, and in that with the clubhouse and pool, and there is an open space requirement as well.
Okay.
With this zoning classification. I believe it's 15%.
Okay.
So, yeah, there will be green space, and they might have a more visually interesting rendering than what I have to kind of show that, but
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you.
Just a couple, I guess I had a follow-up, and I appreciate Mr. Schnetzer for pointing us back to the land use plan because it is a great document that we spent a lot of time, and I know you, Mr. Blackford, are intimately familiar with, too. Mr. Schnetzer pointed out a survey, basically kind of community polling that was done with regard to that focus area, North Gateway focus area. I did also find it interesting in our survey that we also engaged, I think this might have come from the telephone survey, notably at least 60% of respondents in every age category polled believed that more apartments are needed in the city of Gahanna. We've talked a lot about the need for diversity of housing options, and one of those needs seems to be that there needs to be more multifamily, especially as we address the growing region. I did have a kind of a follow-up question to Mrs. McGregor's question. So one of the things that we're very proud of in Gahanna is the per capita acreage of parkland to residents. And so just as we think about adding residents to our community through multifamily projects, and maybe this is a more appropriate question as we think about the Parks Master Plan, but maybe the mayor or you could address how we're thinking about continuing to add park space, or if we are thinking about adding that to maintain that high per capita square foot or acreage.
You want to go first?
Well, I would say that the land use plan doesn't have specific recommendations on parkland versus fees in lieu, but it does talk about the amount of park space within the city, and I believe it's 2.5 times the national average. When you look at amount of parkland, I think it's like 9 acres or something per 1,000 persons, which is 2.5 times the national average. And it talks about how maybe we have enough to go around and we need to have additional types of uses. So it doesn't go into great details, and it doesn't certainly, say that we should make this decision or that decision, but it does, park is our second most abundant land use in the city. There's more of that than vacant land or industrial land. There's more park than industrial, mixed use, and commercial combined. And the land use plan recognizes that we do need more uses that generate taxes, whether that's property tax or income tax, but it's just a small component of land use.
And this is not in a CRA, but it is in a TIF.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
The only thing that I would add, I believe you're right, Councilwoman, that the Parks Master Plan will also play a prominent role in this. And just as a reminder, we do have about 34 acres of parkland to be deeded to the city as part of the Crescent project as well. So we'll be adding a significant amount of acreage to our parks collection relatively soon.
Thank you, Director Blackford. I know we have Mr. Irvin here from the Stonehenge Company, as well as the property owner. Mr. Irvin?
Thank you, council members. My name's Doug Irvin. I'm with Stonehenge Company. Before I get into my presentation, I do want to introduce Monica Whitehead. She's the property owner, and she would like to address you before I get started. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Monica Morgan Whitehead. I'm the owner of this 14 acres that's being developed. I inherited the property from my family. The property's been in my family since the 40s. It was my late grandmother's home place. My grandfather farmed not the wood side, but the weeds, as he called it. We farmed it. I remember going out there as a child picking elderberries. My late grandmother I never knew because she died at 19. So all I had was my mom's recollection of her. And my late mother died 20 years ago. She wanted me to keep this property because she has so many great memories. She loved this property. She loved the woods. She loved the weeds, as we called it, because back then it was in Jefferson Township. It wasn't in Gahanna until probably the last 10 years. But for the past 20 years, I've owned the woods, and I've been contacted by many developers many, many. And I would take time to interview each developer to see what their idea to make my property beautiful. And last year, I decided it was time to share with the people of Gahanna a new, beautiful project. This decision was not easy. Since 40 years, well, longer than 40, 80 years, it's been in my family. And I just felt it was time that we make something new, beautiful out of this property. I chose Stonehenge after a lengthy discussion with them and many others. I respect that their attention to detail of what I want to see and what they do for the community and the people around the property. I really believe in Stonehenge. We've had meetings after meetings of how I'd like to see the development go, and you know, they've included me on architectural meetings, and it's a great partnership. I'm learning a lot, even though I never thought I would need to know all this information, but it's been good, and I just really hope that you approve the rezoning so we can move forward to make this a new, beautiful property for Gahanna. Thank you.
Did you have any questions for Monica?
We'll let you go ahead with your
Okay,
presentation.
great. Thank you again very much for your time. It's a pleasure. We're grateful to be here and appear before you to talk about this rezoning. This is a similar slide deck that we used at the Planning Commission. What we're proposing is a $50 million investment. It'll be gated and fenced, so it's part of us being a good neighbor and also offering a good amenity to our residents. I picked a good night that Nathan was here talking to you about numbers. Actually, he created those numbers for me as it relates to our non-school TIF impact over the 30 years and our school compensation over that same period. There we go. Okay. This is a color version of the same site plan that Director Blackford showed you during his presentation. This one, though, we did put, at least tried to demonstrate the tree buffer. This is a very wooded site currently. Our goal was to keep as much as we can. We are bringing in a firm, EDG, out of Northern Ohio to work with us on landscape design and stormwater management, as well as V3, who's our site engineers. But our goal is to keep, especially along our perimeter, as many of these mature trees as possible. Purely, well, first off, it's the right thing to do, and then secondly is we have these great trees that are mature, and we have if we were to proceed and move forward, the landscaping ordinance requires that we have a certain number of trees, so I'd rather use all of these beautiful existing ones to the greatest extent practicable. As mentioned, as we've mentioned through many presentations, currently this site is impacted by the development of all of our neighbors. The water is running onto us and created a jurisdictional wetland. That's just all drainage from the multifamily developments that occurred over the last 40 years. So we're very mindful that there's water coming at us and that we will also discharge water with our development. So we are going to employ as many sustainable stormwater management practices as possible. And we're doing that by not relying on traditional retention ponds solely. We're going to use rain gardens, everything we can to help charge the existing aquifer and get us a good discharge that would basically come out down in that southeast corner in that water quality pond. And we can also use some of those sustainable stormwater management methods as a buffer to our neighbors. Here is an example. Because most people, when you say rain gardens, people think, oh, wow, I've seen some really crappy drainage before. These are really beautiful rain gardens that both are aesthetically pleasing, but they're also doing a really good job of keeping us just having a lot of water running off roofs and through parking lots into catch basins. This is, our park community that's here in Gahanna. It's been very, very successful. We opened in 2017. We pay a lot of real estate taxes. And we also contribute a lot to Gahanna Jefferson schools. And as you can see, this community, the park actually has a very small number of 3-bedroom units. But our proposed development on Morris Road would only be 1- and 2-bedroom units. So given our number of 21 kids, we're not having a huge impact on the school system or creating any overcrowding, which is typically, a lot of times, multifamily gets a bad rap of that we dump a lot of kids into school systems. And that's not the case, and it wouldn't be at our Morris Road development. There we go. And we're Stonehenge. We're here in Gahanna. We're in a beautiful old church that is a great example of adaptive reuse, and that's our corporate office. We did Creekside. We done Shagbark. We did Sycamore Woods. We finished up an adjoining condominium project that another developer couldn't complete, and we stepped in and got that done. So we've done a lot in Gahanna, and we're good neighbors. As part of being good neighbors, when we appeared at the Development Commission, it inspired a lot of civic engagement. There were a lot of folks here. And we listened to the 16 speakers that spoke. And since that meeting, we've met with residents of both Amberley Village and Windward Trace on 2 occasions, and are going to continue that dialogue as far as so that we get a better understanding of, well, we just want to make sure we understand their concerns. And then we want to at least demonstrate to them what we're proposing and where we can have meeting of the minds, and also generate best ideas from each other. And actually, I think Ed Hoffman is here from Windward Trace, and he and Barb, who's the secretary of Windward Trace, have been very helpful in setting up these meetings. So we're going to continue that dialogue as we move forward because we want to be good neighbors. They're good folks. They've been stakeholders in this community, and none of us like change. So I think the more that we have a dialogue and are open about how we proceed through this process, the better it's going to be for both of us. So I could go on and on about the project, but out of respect to time, I think I will defer to any questions you may have. I do have our development team here. I have Adam Trotman, who's one of my bosses at Stonehenge. I have Scott Harper, our architect, and Andy Gardner is here from V3. So with that, I will yield to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. Council members? Mr. Renner?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a couple of questions, and I want to begin with the statement that you were making, and I just want to elaborate a little bit on it. You said that you've been meeting with the residents, and I applaud Stonehenge for doing that. Thank you. But are you, the residents over there are organized by HOAs? So are you meeting with the HOA and the HOA leadership, and is information, bi-directional a little bit in your meetings?
Yes. Well, the people we're meeting with are both elected officers and just concerned residents from each of those communities. I've shared all of my contact information with them, and they've shared theirs with me. So we've begun the process of emailing back and forth, and I've made an affirmative commitment to them that as we continue to progress with different iterations of our site plan that I'll communicate with them prior to any public meetings so that we can continue to have that iterative discussion as opposed to doing it all here.
Right. So would you characterize the nature of those discussions, or your intent is on listening to feedback that they may have on design or what have you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, this isn't that we just nod our heads and do whatever we're going to want to do.
Right.
No, it's very intentional. And, to date, just like right now, Director Blackford pointed out the setbacks. Just through our discussions with them, we've already found 5 more feet that we're setting back. So we're now 30 feet plus they're 25 feet. So, we're trying to approach this from a win-win, not lose-lose. Okay. And I firmly believe that all of us agree on a hell of a lot more than we disagree on. So as long as we get through the stuff we agree on, then we get some trust and we can then have the meaningful discussions about what we don't agree on.
All right. Good. And thank you again for your leadership and for Stonehenge leadership on that. So I really do appreciate that. Yeah. The next set of questions I have, or actually it's just, I don't want to make it sound like I have a lot. It's under the venue of number 2, compatibility of our hydrological and environmental. I'd like to actually hear from Mr. Gardner a little bit about, if you can talk about the stormwater management and the rain gardens, and I'll let you know that through my county job, your reputation does precede you, and so I thank you for that.
Thank you.
But if you could elaborate a little bit more into some of the details, I think my colleagues and others might like to hear more about what it is instead of just rain gardens. What is it that you're trying to accomplish?
So Andrew Gardner with V3 Companies, civil engineer for the Stonehenge Company. My client approached me several months ago as we began talking about this project and really was very interested in ways that we can reduce the runoff of this site, even more so than just doing the standard stormwater management, building a pond, putting an orifice plate on it, and restricting the flow. And so we've began a lot of discussions about really what we hope will become a low-impact development. What you see up there is obviously a concept that was thought up before we started a lot of these discussions. And I actually envision that concept changing quite a bit by the time we submit a final development plan to really try to address some of these low-impact, more sustainable solutions. We've talked about pervious pavers at our entrance area, not only as a decorative entrance feature, but also as a stormwater management feature. Rain gardens, they're really most effective when you spread them out through the site in little areas and try to reduce that runoff. And there's ways that we can do that and look into that. So we've just engaged EDG, Environmental Design Group, I believe is going to be our landscape architect to assist us with this. And we'll be engaging those folks more when we get to the final development plan stage. But it's really our intention to just make this as low impact as possible. Pervious pavers is one option, rain gardens, grass filter strips, there's all kinds of things we can engage to do this type of things, bioretention, and sort of a combination of all these, magic things you hear about. I wish I could put up some master magic plan that says how we're going to do it, but we're still really having a lot of conversations about the design. When we do get to that next stage with Planning Commission, I know you folks won't have a chance to vote on that, but I'd encourage you to maybe even attend those meetings and we'll be able to give you a lot more detail on that. Some other things I will mention too, that we know there's wetlands on this site. We've already had them evaluated. We've had the wetland delineation done. The Army Corps assessment has been completed and we'll be working with the EPA to address the mitigation of those wetlands. Using a lot of these low-impact stormwater management, tactics on our site will assist with gaining the EPA support to mitigate those wetlands. So, we're still working it out, if you will, but it is our intention to make this as low impact as possible when it comes to stormwater runoff. Does that help?
It does, and thank you for that. you introduced some terms that I was really hoping that you would about their pervious pavement and the grass strips, technologies and what have you. A lot of people don't know, we have a bird sanctuary downtown, that has pervious pavement, and the entire parking lot's a pervious pavement. But studies have shown continuously you don't need to do all of that. You just need to do it in strategic locations. So thank you for that. I am one of those people that's diametric opposed to the old-fashioned storm sewers, piping it off to our creeks. And the more that we can actually force it to go down in the ground with flowers and what have you, natural ambience that actually have long roots, I definitely appreciate that. So, but anyway, thank you for addressing those. Well, thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Urban, I think on your first slide, could you clarify for me that the TIF incentives, those are projected for 30 years, is that correct? Okay.
Right. Well, when I had the discussions with this with Director Strum, his ROI model is based on a 30-year horizon. It was a mouthful. And so I presented it in that manner. So that's over that 30 years. So that would be for the TIF impact is the 13 million over 30 years.
And then as a follow-up, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Are Stonehenge planning, given some of the impacts to, stormwater management, for example, might have on the TIF dollars financially, are you planning on coming back seeking incentives?
Well, at this juncture, everything that we're proposing on site would not be TIF eligible because it doesn't meet a public purpose. I'm not an attorney on Section 41, but we would have to meet a public purpose. So at this juncture, the only thing that would be even TIF eligible that I have knowledge of would deal with any roadway improvements along Morse Road. And there is a water line. Yeah, here, he's whispering in my ear. The city has asked us to connect a distribution line that benefits multiple parcels through our parcel, as opposed to just tapping onto it at our western property edge. So then that way they can have a distribution channel east of that. So that would also be a public purpose eligible item.
Okay. Thank you. And I know that's not necessarily related to the rezoning application
Yeah,
itself, but
yeah, it's hard after Nate just taught you guys how to get rough on developers. Yeah.
If I might, just to clarify, I know inquiries have been made by the developer with regard to possible incentives, but yet there's a lot of information we don't know yet, specifically with regard to the full impacts, drivers of the project, or as you just mentioned, Mr. Irvin, what actually would be eligible for TIFs. So there's a lot of discussions that would need to happen yet before we could have that conversation.
Good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else from council?
Could I interject one other thing? I just wanted to remark, at least respond to Council Member McGregor as it relates to green space and the parks. My management company will hang me in effigy if I don't put dog runs in our communities. I think people have more dogs than people don't have kids anymore. I think they have dogs, and that's great. But we definitely are big proponents of making sure that we have recreational areas, exercise areas for our residents that have pets, and then also within the community, we're using a lot of this sustainable stormwater techniques as also a way that they could be assembly location. Again, there are great moments within the site and places where people could assemble and use as public space. So we definitely are going to try to incorporate as much of that as possible within the site plan because, really, at Stonehenge, we're in the quality of life business. We just do it with buildings. But we really firmly believe that, and the turnover of our residents is indicative of that. We really don't have much. Even when we raise their rent, they stay. because they consider us an extreme value for the price they pay. And also, they just really like living in our communities because, you know, one nice thing about Stonehenge is we don't build and flip. You know, our multifamily communities are ones that are built, we stabilize them, a related company manages them, that's controlled by the same folks that control Stonehenge, and they keep them. So those are good neighbors to have, as opposed to the people with the P.O. box in Boca Raton, Florida that you can't reach.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
You're welcome, thank you.
So this item will be on for first reading on October the 3rd. It will not come back to committee, and it would be on for second reading and adoption on the 17th. At the meeting on the 17th, there will be opportunity for public hearing with proponent testimony being offered and then opponent testimony being offered with rebuttal from proponents. Council President Renner will go over that on the 17th, but we welcome and encourage residents to speak as proponents or opponents. And I just, before we kind of close out of this topic tonight, I do want to thank all of the residents for your engagement and for your opportunity or your willingness to dialogue with the developer so that they can potentially deliver a product that really serves you and serves your interests as well as the rest of the communities. All right. With that, we will move to ordinance number 61-2022, an ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances of the City of Gahanna, enacting chapters 790, 791, and 792 to create a fair housing board, to establish housing non-discrimination laws, and to codify an affirmative defense to eviction commonly referred to as pay to stay. I will introduce this. This is the legislation that I've been talking about all year, so I'm excited to bring it forward. I will pause just momentarily while our residents who are departing are. Okay. So I want to start off by thanking the collaborators who helped work on this legislation. The city attorney's office, specifically Matt Roth, has been really helpful in putting this together, as well as the administration in having us sit down and kind of going over this at a couple different points. This legislation it brings forward foundational pieces to address regional housing needs, and I believe it's going to empower our community to proactively solve problems before they become crises. Non-discrimination is needed as a forward-thinking measure to position the city to address equity in housing. We can be part of the scaling up efforts to address the regional housing challenges and lower the burden for our neighbors on fixed incomes or at lower income levels. Non-discrimination provisions remove the moral judgments on where one's income is coming from while protecting a property owner's investment and smart business practices. As you recall, I'm sure I presented on the background of fair housing laws on February 28th and then a follow-up on April 25th. Since then, we've been working on actually drafting proposed code here that you have before you as Exhibit A. The way it ended up working out that you have in front of you is three proposed chapters of new code. Chapter 790 establishes a fair housing board. And the Fair Housing Board would be instrumental in the enforcement of these sections. I will go through the enforcement flow chart and thank you to our clerk, Mr. Van Meter, for helping me put that together. That explains how a complaint would be fielded and then what would happen through that complaint process. The Fair Housing Board, it would be a three-member volunteer board comprised of 2 council appointees and 1 mayoral appointee, with an effort made to create a board that is geographically representative of the city's wards. The clerk of council or the designee appointed by the clerk would serve as the custodian of records for the board and would be charged with taking minutes and providing notices as required in the ordinance, or excuse me, as required in the proposed code. We did include in there that the board would meet at least once a year to adopt and review rules of procedure and receive training on fair housing matters. We clarified in this section that there would be no fee for the filing of a complaint, as we certainly don't want to burden potential complainants who are coming forward. Chapter 791 is really the bulk of the housing non-discrimination proposal. With this, we've all kind of identified that we would like to promote strengthening of neighborhoods and protect our residents from unfair discrimination. In creating housing non-discrimination that includes source of income protection, we're also really addressing some of the needs that have been promoted to us by some of our regional think tanks and thought partners. I wanted to specifically reference us back to the MORPC Regional Housing Strategy Report. The Regional Housing Strategy Report was really supportive of source of income non-discrimination as a recommended policy and recommended a regional approach. In putting forward source of income non-discrimination in this ordinance, we would be joining many of our regional neighbors in including this provision, which was part of helping to stabilize housing throughout the community and ensure that as we add, as other organizations are adding protections or rental support and rental assistance for residents who may have gaps or shortcomings, that we are making sure that their housing is stable in the process. In the community survey referenced in that regional housing strategy, when asked about housing improvements to better meet the needs of the people they serve, housing providers ranked the following improvements as their top 3 needs. 1, more housing at lower price points. 2, better quality of available housing. And 3, more housing for the aging population and/or people with disabilities. Source of income non-discrimination will help us address all 3 of these areas, specifically through ensuring that all forms of income, not just employment income, all forms of legal and verified and substantiated income would qualify a resident for ensuring that they could qualify for that unit. The legislation also makes sure that a landlord would have protection, that a landlord is not required to accept a tenant who does not have verified or substantiated income, or that income would be insufficient to meet the costs of the unit. Of course, too, a landlord retains their right to refuse a lease to a person if the person seeking housing intends to occupy with a larger number of persons than could be accommodated under occupancy standards. And we've also incorporated revised code exemptions that, for example, for religious housing, religious-based housing, or housing where it's predominantly owner-occupied, where just like you would be subletting a room in your own home and sharing common areas, housing non-discrimination would not apply in limited circumstances like that. Public awareness and promotion of the fair housing goals is also codified in the chapter. We would be seeking that landlords or property owners who are renting or selling at least 10 units or more in a given calendar year would be promoting fair housing by showing an equal opportunity logotype or having an equal opportunity statement on their applications. Most of the larger companies in and around Central Ohio are already doing this. They're already required under HUD and fair housing standards to do so. The code also the proposed code also goes on to talk about the enforcement provisions of the chapter. One of the things that came up through our discussions on this was the need to sort of balance enforcement with OCRC and with local. Really, the goal of this is to make sure that if it can go to Ohio Civil Rights Commission, then it would go to Ohio Civil Rights Commission. It's not going to stay locally for local enforcement. In discussions with the Director of Public Affairs for OCRC, that was their preferred method, and that's really what we're seeing in regional non-discrimination policies in our neighboring communities as well. If the, and I'll go through the enforcement chart, so I'll pause there on that issue. The third chapter that is being introduced is Chapter 792. This is a corollary in a way to source of income non-discrimination. This is what's called pay to stay. It's what's being referred to as pay to stay. Pay to stay it codifies a right under common law or in case law that a tenant could assert as an affirmative defense that I have the ability to pay and I tried to pay the landlord, but he wouldn't accept my payment, and so I shouldn't be evicted. That affirmative defense already exists under common law. And one of the recommendations from housing experts around the region is to include pay to stay as a corollary to source of income. One example that came up last year is a resident received impact housing funds, but they were late on their rent. The landlord did not want to accept the rental assistance, even though they had it granted to them already from impact. The landlord said, sorry, it's our policy to not accept late rent, we're evicting you. And at that point, the tenant had no real remedy because the community, I don't believe, had, the community didn't have pay to stay codified. So in this, like I said, this really goes hand in hand with pay to stay. One thing that's really important in this is that I took a look at, I took a look at Columbus, Reynoldsburg, Dayton, Maple Heights, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo. And a lot of these ordinances included both pre-filing remedy and post-filing remedy. So what I mean by that is that there was the tenant had the right to tender the rent before the landlord filed the complaint for eviction and also after the landlord filed the complaint for eviction. That is not different from what already exists as an affirmative defense, but it did codify both. One of the communities that I looked at, which I think was Maple Heights, actually took it a step further. It said that even if the judgment has been rendered to grant the eviction, as long as the writ of restitution or the set out has not yet occurred, then there's still a right to tender on the behalf of the tenant. That was an outlier, and I did not include that here as a proposed, as proposed. Okay. The thing to note about this is that we want to make sure that the landlord gets paid, that the landlord is made whole, and so the ordinance does include, or the legislation does include provisions that the tenant would have to tender, not just the past due rent, but also late fees and costs. So the longer it goes unpaid, the higher the cost to the tenant. It discourages the tenant from doing this, and so there's certainly no incentive for the tenant to fall behind and then catch up and fall behind and catch up because the tenant is going to have additional expenses arising out of this. These measures are safety valves to help curb the eviction rates. Franklin County was noted in 2018 to have the highest eviction rate in Franklin County. And so one of the things that we can do about that is by passing pay-to-stay legislation. Unstable housing, as I think you guys probably are already familiar, but unstable housing creates school disruption. And when we have disruption in education, especially among young people, there's a direct correlation then between that schooling interruption and lower success outcomes. It also prevents skilled workforce participation and delays that entry into the workforce if there's interruption in a child's schooling. So Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions right now, but may I add comments?
Of course, Mr. Renner.
I first want to say thank you. Thank you to the administration, to a lot of staff, to Marissa, to you. I know that this has been a long collaborative effort to get to understand the nuts and bolts and some of the details, which we may have to dig deeper into. And so my comments, so first I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to everybody involved in doing this. My next set of comments is really just talking at a high level. You've touched on a lot of problems facing Franklin County, and we've been talking about here in this dais, and our mayor has been talking about the need for more housing, and the housing needs is going to increase, and we're feeling that pressure. In fact, we had an ordinance where we're facing another one. So getting something like this codified into our rules and our laws is actually important. And one of the things that I really like about this is one of the reasons why I ran to serve at the local level. Local government is one of the most powerful positions that we can actually be in. And it's the most powerful because we're directly accountable to the electors, our people, our bosses. This puts in to codify a way of empowering people at the local level where nothing exists. And yeah, I know I've heard people talk about, well, there might be something with HUD and that kind of thing, but this really puts it at the local level, and it empowers people. They know what to do. They know how, if they have a legitimate complaint. And my other side of this is that I enjoy that you've taken a lot of time to actually consider the other side, the landlords, their rights. We list it. We know what their responsibilities are. And I think you gave a great summary about some more in-depth view of landlords and what they can do. So I guess I really strongly, this is a win-win-win legislation. There is no real downside to this whatsoever because it empowers people at the local level. They know how to do this. It protects. As we know that housing, we have no ability of predicting the stresses that are going to come on housing. And everybody living in the families, that therefore, some of the projections in the future, the naysayers really want us to believe that things are really going to get chaotic. So this protects people, but this also protects property owners and landlords. My question, I guess, would be, again, from a high level, can you talk about a little bit more about what other, and I'm trying to structure my question and I apologize, but what else can a landlord do, a property owner that's having a problem? And I think I know what some of the answers are. If they fail to meet a contract and a tenant is not providing rent, I think I know that path. But what if we get into the gray space that we all know and we've all seen where a tenant is just causing problems, per se? Are there things in here that a landlord could actually come to the local level and say, hey, or maybe it's not here, but maybe there's another venue for property owners to say, hey, I really got a problem?
Well, so nothing in this would restrict a landlord's right or ability to evict for reasons other than non-payment of rent. A landlord maintains his or her right to evict for other violations of the lease. And the landlord, further, I mean, they're in a position of power because they've drafted the contract. The contract is for a fixed amount of time. Nothing in here would require that contract be extended. So there is a definite end date to their relationship with a tenant.
Okay.
I did just want to reference really quick, because I said I would and then I didn't do it, the complaint process flow chart that Mr. Van Meter and I put together based on the draft of the ordinance. We kind of realized as we were talking about this in one of our large meetings that it was probably helpful to explain the process of how the complaint, and this is attached as an exhibit under the ordinances as well. But this explains really how kind of the complaint process works in the ordinance the way it's currently drafted. So if the complaint would be filed by the aggrieved party with a fair housing officer. That fair housing officer would then investigate the complaint and notify the accused party. Based on kind of a prima facie, what's contained in that complaint, the fair housing officer would then make a determination as to whether there's probable cause to move forward or to say that this is not a discriminatory circumstance. And so in that case, the aggrieved party could still file directly with the Fair Housing Board against the accused directly, or the aggrieved party could file independently with OCRC, Ohio Civil Rights Commission. We would certainly encourage them to go the OCRC route instead of the local route in that scenario. If the fair housing officer determines that probable cause of discriminatory practice exists, the fair housing officer would invite the parties to mediation. And this really goes to Mr. Renner's point about local control and really doing what's best for our community. So our ability to really create kind of a customized solution for our own neighbors is really what's baked into this proposal. The hope is then that a conciliation agreement is reached, but if it is not, then if that discrimination was based on a state-recognized protected class, then it would be referred to OCRC by the fair housing officer. If the discrimination was based only on locally recognized protected class, such as a source of income issue, then it would be referred to the Fair Housing Board. And then in that Chapter 790, that's what details how the Fair Housing Board process would be governed from there, including notices being issued by the clerk and a hearing being set.
Can you define OCRC again? Because I think you've said it, but I missed it.
Ohio Civil Rights Commission.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Schnetzer.
First off, thank you to you and everybody else that put in the time to craft this, and thank you for the summary. I'm going to need some time to digest it. It was a good summary, but a lengthy one, and for those non-legal minded folks, it might take a minute here to sink in. But I'm hoping you can help me kind of get up the curve here a little bit. Can you give an example? And you may have just answered this one, but I have it on my notes, so I'll just recite it. What's an example of a case that would go to the OCRC versus a local case or a local filing, I suppose would be another way to put it?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So the OCRC has a partnership agreement with HUD. And through that partnership agreement, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission enforces all federally protected recognized classes. That includes race, national origin, gender, sex, and currently that is interpreted as also including sexual orientation and gender identity because of the Bostock decision and then also Title VII guidance that was recently issued. So all of those protected classes would be referred then to OCRC. And that's the vast majority of any type of discrimination that we would really see. It also includes disability, things, age, that kind of thing. If the complaint came in, though, that the landlord did not accept me because they refused to count my child support or my veterans benefits as substantiated and verified income that would qualify me to rent this apartment, that would stay with local enforcement. Because the state does not recognize source of income as a protected class, that would be really the sole issue that would stay with us. The other point I want to just make quickly is that the right to cure or the pay to stay, there's no enforcement by the city for that. That is codifying an affirmative defense that would empower the defendant to be able to utilize that defense if they were to face an eviction process.
Okay. I think I followed.
Okay.
So kind of piggybacking off of that, I know we've had some discussions, thus far this year, so, to date, about source of income. I was, again, going through the legislation. There appears to be a fairly lengthy listing of other items, and I guess my question is are those other items locally defined, or is there a state or a federal listing that could perhaps be incorporated by reference into here so that we're not, it's kind of just a frame of mind of just for the sake of clean text, so that we're not finding ourselves having to consistently, or constantly, I should say, update the legislation. Can it just refer to a table or something at the federal or the state level?
I haven't found legislation that does that yet. I think that question was also raised by Director Burry, and I appreciated that. We did try to do that with the exceptions, and actually that's why we referenced Ohio Revised Code for exceptions. I was not able to find anything, but we did mimic, we really tried hard to mimic HUD, HUD classifications.
Okay. Then the last question I have for you, I guess, is just, it sounds like the law department has given this a good look to make sure that it's consistent. Has the administration had any chance to assess the impact of this on city operations?
Do you want to go first, Rick? We've had conversations around it. Certainly having, I think we talked about having the assistant city attorney act as the fair housing officer. I know we've had discussions around what happens if that becomes too burdensome, and then are we looking at adding a staffing position? What does that look like down the road? Until I think this actually would be implemented, we understand how many cases we're having. We don't really know what the burden would be. Is it something that can be handled by having Mr. Roth be designated as the fair housing officer? Not sure. But those kind of the preliminary discussions we've had. Mr. Malarski, did you have any other comments around that? Because that actually would be impacting your department.
Yeah, we've discussed this right now. We think there's going to be so few. We believe there's going to be so few filings that we don't think it's going to have much of an impact. But if it were to have more, then we would be coming back to you guys and saying, hey, we need money to fund a position. But again, I agree. We don't know what it's going to be. So. I believe it was your research, Councilwoman Bowers, that led us to that belief. Is that correct?
Yeah, in our, and Mr. Van Meter assisted with polling other municipalities on what their enforcement burden has looked like. I know this was a question if, regarding kind of the financial impact that this might have. No other community has noted any significant financial impact from legislation like this. My expectation is that this would come back to committee, so we'd go to first reading and then come back to committee for further discussion. I know there were some changes that Mr. Malarski would like to review, which may or may not result in some modifications or amendments, but that would be my recommendation. So we have another opportunity to kind of come back and have another conversation about this. Any other discussion for tonight?
I have a lot of questions, but I think I haven't had time to digest all, so maybe that would be, this is the first time I've seen it this weekend, so.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, want to echo Mr. Renner's comments and also express my thanks to you for the months of work that I know you've been looking at this, and also to Clerk Van Meter and the administration on this. I view this as a win-win, both for tenants and landlords. I mentioned symbiotic benefits earlier in another context in the meeting. I think this is a piece of legislation that gets us there as well. So thank you. Appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
I do have one question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody?
One question I have, and maybe you can prepare for next time, is the source of income. I kind of, well, not kind of, I object to that in the sense that what other businesses set parameters for how you pay? I mean, if you go to the grocery store can take WIC or they cannot take WIC. They can take cash or they cannot take cash. They can take credit card or they cannot take credit card. So most of the time, a lot of times our landlords are just have one or two residents have, properties. It's a small business, and I have a problem with us dictating how they can take their income, how they can receive the income. I just don't see, it just doesn't seem fair to put that burden on them. I mean, if they want to, it's fine, and many do. But if they don't want to, I don't see why they shouldn't be allowed to choose how they want to accept rent. Because, like I say, what other businesses are required? Is there by law set how you have to receive payment?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. Thank you. I'll think about that. And
Yeah, I don't have to answer tonight, but I guess that's kind of my problem with that, is I just can't quite, and having had, family members that have had rentals, I just think, why would they be burdened with that requirement?
I would have to look at this, but I don't think this says how they have to accept rent, just how they count how much money is coming into the household. I believe that's what the distinction is. They can still limit how they accept the rent. It's just when they're saying, you make $50,000 a year, they could be saying, well, you really make $70,000 a year because you're not counting A, B, and C. That's what I believe this was referring to.
yeah, they could still choose how they, whether they take a credit card or whether they take cash. It's the qualification aspect that matters. So we want you to count those sources of income when you're qualifying them to meet the terms of the lease. So that is a really important distinction. Ms. Padova, did you have a comment? Okay.
No, I just fully agree that it's not how they're accepting it. It's they have the money to pay for it and just the qualifying of it.
Well, but they still have to accept the way they pay it. It has from the source that comes from.
Yeah.
Whether there's paperwork they want involved in it, they don't want to do it, or for whatever reason, why do they have to, are they required to do that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, and that's one of the concerns I think that is actually that's sort of, I think there's a misinformation that is very pervasive, that for example, that accepting housing choice vouchers is going to create a burden on a landlord. I had a conversation with CMHA about what are their turnaround times and how quickly do they have to qualify the unit and how quickly are they getting those payments. CMHA verified to me that they are on track with making sure that they are getting that work turned around and that it's minimal burden to the landlord. Thereafter, it might, just as an anecdotal, one of my best friends owned a 6-unit apartment in Cincinnati, and she said her Section 8 units were her best tenants because she always knew when that check was going to come. So I think part of this is demystifying what housing choice vouchers look like and how they actually impact the landlord. But I appreciate the comments, I really do. Mr. Renner, you had a...
Yeah, sorry.
okay.
I was writing a note so I don't forget my questions. Sorry. You probably said this in the beginning, and I may have missed it, but how, out of all the communities around the Outer Belt and in Franklin County and even Central Ohio, how many communities actually have this type of legislation?
So virtually everyone has housing non-discrimination, not necessarily including source of income. Source of income includes now, and I saw Mary Dixon here earlier, who's been one of our proponents. She has the whole list for me, but it's like a growing number. I mean, it was at least Worthington, Bexley, Reynoldsburg, Columbus, Westerville, and I believe there were a couple others that were working on it as well. Whitehall passed source of income as well. Yeah, I think Whitehall also passed source of income. So many of our regional neighbors have already passed source of income. Columbus certainly did. And then also pay to stay is also working its way too. Reynoldsburg, Columbus, and a number of other suburbs. At this point, we're not on the leading edge of this. We are just part of the fabric of the region, so that the business community already knows that this is sort of the practice in Central Ohio. We are helping standardize business practices by passing this at this point.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's we're modernizing and making it more equitable across the county and even the region as we're doing this, so I appreciate that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do have my notes. Source of income, non-discrimination, Bexley, Columbus, Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, Westerville, and Worthington.
That's good. The other comment that I was writing my notes down is that we have a lot of benevolent landlords here in Gahanna, and I think this will actually help them as well, providing structure so that they know what are some of the ins and outs, and how can they actually even help tenants even more. So I definitely push on that.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
One other thing I had from early on is you said there wasn't a fee to apply, which I know there's not been much, but I always feel that there should be some fee. And to file a complaint, because, and if the complaint is justified, then you could always send the fee back, give the fee back. But I think that there should be some fee, so people just don't, for whatever reason, just feel, whatever reason, I'm going to file a complaint. But they have to have, so that there's some skin in the game for them to start it. If it's sustained, give them their feedback. If it's a legitimate complaint, then they can get their fee back. But it seems like there should be, I kind of felt like that with the rental registration, or the sidewalk thing, when they were applying, there should be some fee. And if it's found out to be a legitimate complaint, then they get their fee back.
Thank you. Any other discussion tonight?
I just want to say something. I worked in this for a number of years, and I work with people with disabilities. And indeed, I didn't know how I was going to be able to do this, because obviously they were not going to be paying most of the rent. And it was very interesting when I would go in and I'd say, I'd go to I think I was in every apartment in Franklin County. So they were always wonderful to us, because I could go in and say, okay, they said, we don't take Section 8. I said, oh, no, this isn't Section 8. And I said, I'm going to be paying part of this. And they went, oh. And I said, well, and I could pay you, and then they could pay us, my people back. And it always, we're going to get our money.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to get your money.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could actually make people understand that if you do that like a week before, you're never going to be kicked out, because you're always going to have paid your money.
Yep. Yep.
So that's another thing.
Yeah, I appreciate.
So it's kind of an amazing thing. People with disabilities have some very difficult times. And, we've been a community here that has worked with people with disabilities for a very long time. And, I think when you go over to Stone Ridge and you see the kids coming out, or the people that are living in the one park that we made, it's just truly a kind of a wonderful thing to be able to do. And I think that if we could make people understand that you just got to pay what you got to pay, and hopefully things will work out.
Yes, thank you. And unfortunately, you're right. Unfortunately, I think Gahanna is on trend with not accepting housing choice vouchers with the rest of the region. In some polling that's been done by AHACO, the informal polling kind of secret shopper is revealing that about 50% of apartment complexes are not accepting housing choice vouchers, and that is inclusive of what's going on here too, unfortunately. But certainly not consistent with the values that we have to make sure that people are included as long as they can make their rent. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Malarski?
Thank you. I was trying to rehash in my mind what Councilwoman McGregor was saying, and I think I got her point a little clearer now. So I believe you're saying that since we would be saying that they must consider the governmental subsidies such as housing vouchers, they would then be required to accept those housing vouchers as well, and that's what you didn't find to be fair. And the only thing I could really equate that to would be food stamps. Stores are required to accept food stamps. That would be like the housing voucher. So it would just be saying that so it would be similar to that, saying yes, you do have to accept those, just like stores have to accept food stamps. That is the one area that I can think of that we do require people to accept governmental subsidies. There might be others, that's just off the top of my head.
If I could, I know initially, I think it was first quarter of the year when we were having discussions about this, and we had reached out to the Columbus Realtors, and they were very much in support of the fair housing legislation that was being proposed. However, they expressed concerns at that time with regard to the source of income legislation, specifically around the fact that HUD vouchers, such as what would be required to be accepted here, could result, because it's a voluntary program, there are inspections that are associated with that. They had expressed concern that what they had found is when a landlord is required to accept that, it leads to delays of weeks, if not months at times, because inspections have to be scheduled, et cetera. So the apartment is sitting empty, nobody's getting in the apartment, and that was one of the concerns that they had. I'm just curious, I have not heard anything from the Columbus Realtor since then as to whether or not that position has changed, given what you have shared of perhaps some other municipalities that have since adopted this. So I want to just question whether or not you've heard anything else from them since.
The only thing I'm aware of at this point is that I did speak with CMHA about the inspection process. They did say that and I don't have my notes directly in front of me, I can circulate that. They did say that their inspection process is on time and that they are very sensitive to that fact, and that they are working very hard. I also spoke with attorneys from Legal Aid Society who specifically work in the housing sector, and they did indicate that CMHA has recently outsourced all of that inspection work for housing choice vouchers, and it seems to be going much better now because there is sufficient staffing of the inspection process. Other communities have, since you mentioned that, other communities have since adopted source of income non-discrimination, and I don't believe that they've been getting much in the way of resistance at this point because it has become sort of standardized in the region. And CMHA is allocating more resources, and the county is allocating more resources to making sure that those inspections are moving forward so as to not prejudice the landlords.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. So first reading, come back, and then we'll be on for second reading and vote on the 17th. Okay, let's see, where are we? Two items from the Department of Administrative Services, ordinance number 59-2022 and ordinance number 60-2022. Director Volmer.
Good evening. I have two items here. I'm going to talk about those together since they go together. With me, I have Finance Manager Corey Weibensinger with me. He assisted HR Manager Melissa Jackson and myself with the financial aspect, along with Director Burry, who's in the back as well. Many thanks to Michael Blackford for sticking around for this as well. So the first thing we have, there's two things. It's an amendment to the salary ordinance and then an amendment to the pay plan. So Corey and I are here today to present on the unclassified employee compensation for the unclassified. I'm so sorry. I took a red eye last night, so I'm struggling a little. So first we wanted to cover the history of compensation. So as you'll remember, in 2021, we did phase one of the compensation program that resulted over the last 4 years. We've been working to ensure that the city's compensation program for the unclassified personnel is competitive for recruitment and retention purposes. As you'll remember, we engaged Clemens Nelson and Associates in 2021 to complete a review of the unclassified employee compensation. Phase one of that compensation was included in the 2021 budget, where it was approved to shift the wage scales by 10%. We did collective bargaining-driven adjustments, and then we did market-driven and internal adjustments. So the next part of the compensation program is to complete phase two. So what phase two would do, it includes the implementation of a step wage scale. That also includes a step plan alignment and then a market-driven wage adjustments. So a step plan would be added to the current compensation so it's a steps start through 5 for a total of 6 steps between the minimum and the midpoint of each pay grade. And then over the midpoint, I'll describe in a little bit how employees would go through that step plan. The next two things that needed done are the market wage adjustments. So this would complete the pay rate adjustments from the 2021 and 2022 recommendations by Clemens Nelson based on the years of service and employee's current position. And then phase two would do the step plan alignment. So we would move employees not affected by the market wage adjustments into a step closest to their current pay without reducing pay. So in order to implement phase two actions, we're here in front of you today to respectfully request amendment to the salary ordinance to add those steps and then adjust certain pay grades to market rate. We are requesting emergency on this ordinance amendment to ensure that we can pay employees starting with the October 17th for pay rate changes, which is that would be the last 5 pays of the year. So employees would see an adjustment on the first pay in November. Also included in my report are modifications to the salary ordinance, in addition to the step plan, modifications to different pay grades, and the modifications as a result of departmental realignments as well, and then deletions of positions that are no longer being used. In order to implement the step plan, the pay administration policy also needs to be amended. Those revisions are included in the attachments to the agenda as well, and those revisions include and implement how the step wage scale would be implemented. So those individuals who are in a step, let's say someone's in step 1, on their anniversary date, they would go to step 2 unless there's some kind of financial hardship on the city and a different adjustment is being made. Once an employee reaches step 5 or the midpoint, they would receive whatever the annual budgeted increase is. So for example, this year it was a 2%. In other years it's been a 3% or whatever is budgeted and approved by council during the budget process each year. The third action is we would use existing salary savings for 2022 to implement Phase 2, to do the market adjustments and the step plan alignment. We are seeing a 9% or $2.7 million is the projected salary savings due to vacancies and positions that have been hard to fill this year. So we would request that we would use $28,000 for the last 5 pays of 2022, or $32,500 with estimated benefits. There is no action needed by council to transfer this amount into various accounts, as it's under the $3,000 threshold that the Director of Finance is authorized to approve under the appropriation ordinance. And then step 4, to complete the compensation program, is we would advance employees in their step plan on the anniversary for 2023, as I discussed. So unclassified employees would no longer receive an increase in January each year. They would receive an increase on their anniversary date. So that would be the date that they were hired, or the date that they were promoted, if they were promoted since they have been here. And then as ongoing maintenance, just like we have ongoing maintenance programs for a variety of our infrastructure, human capital is no different. The compensation system would then need to be reviewed every 3 to 5 years to provide for market adjustments. So that would be continuing forward every 3 to 5 years. We would run a compensation study to ensure that our rates are still adequate with the market. And Corey and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you both for sticking around for a very long meeting tonight. We appreciate it. Any discussion tonight? You don't have to.
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I feel very verbose this evening. I appreciate you sticking around and for the update. Just a quick question. This is all prospective looking. There's nothing about this that's retroactive.
Correct.
Correct. All right. Thank you. I'm good. Quick, easy question.
Okay, this has already been on for first reading, so it'll come on for second reading on October 3rd with emergency. Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else for the agenda tonight, we are adjourned. Have a good night.